I'm Lisa. Standing in the bustling food court of the mall, I watched as my stepmother, Diana, and my half-sisters, Lily and Ava, stared at me in utter shock. Their faces were a mix of disbelief and horror, and I couldn't help but feel a sense of satisfaction wash over me. Just moments ago, they had been discussing how I was a disappointment, how I needed to accept my limitations, and how they were planning to redirect my inheritance. Little did they know, I was the one in control. It all started weeks ago when we planned this Saturday afternoon shopping trip to the Silver Lake Premium Mall. Diana, a cold and calculating woman, had always seen me as a burden. Lily, 25, had just graduated from business school and was eager to make her mark in the corporate world. Ava, 23, was a budding fashion designer with a bright future ahead. And me? I was the quiet one, the one who seemed to blend into the background. As we entered the mall, I could already feel the tension in the air. Diana and my half-sisters walked ahead of me, their heads held high, while I trailed behind like a lost puppy. They were dressed in designer clothes and expensive jewelry, while I wore a simple pair of jeans and a plain sweater. I could feel their judgmental looks and hear their whispered comments, but I tried to ignore them. We stopped at a high-end department store, and Diana and my half-sisters started browsing through the racks of designer clothes. They were laughing and chatting, completely oblivious to my presence. I stood there, feeling like an outsider, until Lily thrust a few shopping bags into my hands and said, "Hold these for us. We're going to try on some dresses for the charity gala next month." I nodded and took the bags, feeling a sense of resentment building inside me. I had never been invited to any of their fancy events, and I knew they only saw me as a means to carry their bags. As I stood there waiting, I couldn't help but overhear their conversation. "Lisa, you really need to step up your game," Diana said, her voice filled with disappointment. "You're 30 years old and still working in that little office. You have no ambition, no drive. Look at your sisters. They're building successful careers, making connections, and creating their futures. You're just existing." Lily nodded in agreement. "Yeah, Lisa. You need to start taking risks and pushing yourself. You can't just settle for mediocrity." Ava giggled. "Maybe she should just stick to shopping at Target. That's more her speed." I felt my face flush with anger, but I tried to keep my composure. I knew they were trying to get a rise out of me, and I wasn't going to let them win. Instead, I took a deep breath and said, "I'm fine with my life. I'm happy doing what I'm doing." Diana rolled her eyes. "That's exactly the problem, Lisa. You're too content with being average. You need to set some goals and work towards them. Otherwise, you're never going to amount to anything." I wanted to scream at them, to tell them that they didn't know anything about me, but I held my tongue. I knew it wouldn't do any good. Instead, I just stood there, listening to their cruel words, feeling like a failure. After a while, we left the department store and headed towards the food court. As we walked, Diana and my half-sisters continued to talk about their upcoming events and parties, while I remained silent. I felt like an outsider, like I didn't belong with them. When we reached the food court, we found a table in the upscale section and sat down. Diana and my half-sisters ordered expensive meals, while I ordered a simple salad. As we ate, they continued to talk about their lives, their careers, and their futures, while I sat there, feeling like a spectator. Suddenly, my phone rang. I looked at the caller ID and saw that it was my assistant, Mark. I excused myself and stepped away from the table to answer the call. "Lisa, I'm sorry to bother you on a Saturday, but we have an urgent situation at the Silver Lake Premium Mall. The new tenant in the East Wing is asking for authorization to proceed with the electrical upgrades, and the lease agreement requires your signature before we can approve the additional costs." I frowned. "How much are we talking about?" Mark replied, "The electrical upgrades will cost about $55,000, and the tenant is requesting expedited completion for their Christmas season opening. The total lease modification would bring their first-year commitment to just over $2.5 million. I thought for a moment. That seems reasonable. I'll be there in about 10 minutes to review the paperwork. Mark said, "Thank you, Lisa. I'll have everything ready in the main office." I hung up the phone and walked back to the table. Diana and my half-sisters were looking at me with curious expressions. "Who was that?" Lily asked. "Work," I said simply. Diana frowned. "What kind of work requires you to answer the phone on a Saturday? And who talks about $55,000 for electrical work?" Before I could answer, two men in mall security uniforms approached our table. "Excuse me," the older one said politely. "Are you Ms. Lisa?" I nodded. "Yes. Ma'am, Mr. Mark asked us to find you. He said you needed to get to the management office for some urgent paperwork. Something about tenant approvals." I thanked them and stood up. "I'll head over now." The security officers nodded respectfully and walked away. I started to leave, but Diana grabbed my arm. "Wait just a minute," she said sharply. "What exactly is going on here? Why is mall management looking for you? Why are security guards treating you like you're important?" I looked at her hand on my arm, then at her face, then at Lily and Ava's confused expressions. "I need to go take care of some business," I said calmly. "What business?" Lily demanded. "You said you work in data analysis. What does data analysis have to do with mall management and tenant leases and electrical upgrades?" I gently removed Diana's hand from my arm and picked up my purse. "I'll explain later. This shouldn't take long." But as I started to walk away, Diana's voice cut through the mall noise, loud enough for other shoppers to hear. "Lisa, you stop right there and explain what's happening." I turned back to face them. Diana looked angry and confused. Lily and Ava looked suspicious and concerned. Around us, other shoppers had slowed their pace, clearly interested in the drama unfolding. "The mall management office is expecting me," I said simply. "I need to go sign some paperwork." "What paperwork?" Ava pressed. "Why would they be looking for you specifically? This doesn't make any sense." I took a deep breath, looking at the three women who had spent the afternoon telling me how ordinary and disappointing I was, how I needed to accept my limitations and be realistic about my future. "It makes perfect sense," I said quietly. "I need to approve a lease modification for one of our tenants." "Our tenants?" Diana's voice was sharp with confusion and growing alarm. "The mall's tenants. I need to review their request for electrical upgrades and authorize the additional costs before they can proceed with their build-out for the Christmas season." Lily's mouth fell open slightly. "What are you talking about?" "I'm talking about my job, Lily. My boring, ordinary job doing data analysis. Data analysis for property management and real estate development. Specifically for Silver Lake premium properties." The noise of the mall seemed to fade as my words sank in. Diana's face had gone pale. Lily and Ava were staring at me with identical expressions of dawning horror. "That's impossible," Diana whispered. "Which part?" "That I work in property management? That I analyze data for real estate development? Or that I have the authority to approve tenant lease modifications?" "You said you work for a small company," Ava protested weakly. "I do work for a small company. Very small, actually. Just me. Lisa Properties owns and manages 20 retail properties throughout the state, including this mall. I bought Silver Lake Premium 4 years ago, right after my father died." The shopping bags Lily had been carrying slipped from her hands, luxury items scattering across the food court floor. Ava's face had gone completely white. Diana looked like she might be having trouble breathing. "That's not possible," she repeated, her voice barely audible. "It's very possible. In fact, it's reality. The trust fund my father left me, I never needed to wait until 35 to access it. I used it as collateral to secure financing for my first property acquisition when I was 27. By the time he died, my portfolio was worth about $50 million. Today, it's worth just over $250 million. Just then, the mall security officers returned, along with a man in a suit who was clearly management. Ms. Lisa, he said politely. I'm Mark, the property manager. I hate to interrupt your family time, but if you could spare a few minutes to review the Zara lease modification. They're hoping to get started on the electrical work first thing Monday morning. Of course, Mark, I said. Diana, Lily, Ava, this is Mark, who manages day-to-day operations for the mall. Mark, this is my family. Mark smiled pleasantly at them, then did a double take as he noticed the scattered shopping bags and their shocked expressions. Is everything all right? Everything's fine, I said calmly. They were just surprised to learn about my work. I don't usually discuss business during family time. Of course not, Mark said. Well, the contracts are ready for your review whenever you're available. I'll be right there, I said. Mark nodded and walked away, followed by the security officers. I turned back to face Diana and my half-sisters, who were still frozen in place like mannequins. So, I said conversationally, about that trust fund modification you were discussing. The one where you were planning to have my inheritance redirected to Lily and Ava for being more successful than me. Diana's mouth opened and closed soundlessly. I should probably mention that the trust fund represents less than 7% of my current net worth. My father set it up as a safety net, but I haven't needed it. In fact, I've been adding to it over the years, planning to use it for charitable giving. Lily found her voice first, though it came out as barely more than a whisper. You own this mall? I own this mall. I also own the shopping center where Ava's design studio is located, the office building where Lily's marketing firm leases space, and the residential complex where Diana's book club meets every Wednesday. Ava's legs seemed to give out. She sat down heavily in her chair, staring at me with wide, horrified eyes. Your apartment, she whispered. You said you live in a one-bedroom apartment. I do. It's the penthouse apartment in the luxury building I developed downtown. 3,500 square feet, private elevator, rooftop garden. I like having everything on one floor. It's technically one bedroom, just happens to be larger than most houses. Diana finally managed to speak, her voice hoarse with shock. This is impossible. You drive a Toyota Corolla. You dress like someone who doesn't need to impress anyone. Yes, I said. The Toyota gets good gas mileage and fits in parking spaces easily. Very practical for someone who spends a lot of time visiting various properties. And I dress comfortably because I'm usually crawling around construction sites or reviewing building plans. But you never said anything, Lily protested weakly. You never asked. You all made assumptions about my life, my success, my worth. You decided I was a disappointment and a failure without ever actually wanting to know what I do or how I'm doing. I picked up Lily's dropped shopping bags and handed them back to her. Besides, what would have been the point of telling you? So you could suddenly decide I was worth your time and attention? So you could start asking for loans or investments or favors? I've watched how you treat people you think are beneath you, Diana. I've seen how Lily and Ava dismiss anyone they consider unsuccessful or ordinary. Diana was shaking now, whether from shock or anger or fear, I couldn't tell. Your father, she began, but I cut her off. My father knew exactly what I was doing. He was incredibly proud of my business success. We talked every week about my properties, my plans, my achievements. He just also knew that you and the girls weren't interested in hearing about it, so he didn't force the subject. I glanced at my watch. I really do need to go review those lease documents. Zara wants to open their holiday display early, and every day of delay costs them money. Lisa, wait, Diana called out desperately as I started to walk away. We can talk about this. We can work this out. I turned back one more time, looking at the three women who had spent the afternoon telling me I was an embarrassment, a disappointment, a failure who needed to accept her limitations. Work what out, Diana? The part where you were planning to steal my inheritance? The part where you've spent years telling me I'm worthless? Or the part where you just found out that the mediocre, ordinary, disappointing daughter you've been trying to get rid of actually owns the ground you're standing on? The food court had gotten quieter, other shoppers clearly listening to our conversation. Several people had their phones out, probably recording what was turning into quite the public family drama. I think we need to have a longer conversation about realistic expectations and accepting limitations, I continued. Starting with your expectation that you could manipulate legal documents to steal from me. And you need to accept the limitation that your financial security depends entirely on my goodwill. Diana's face went from pale to gray. You see that charitable foundation you mentioned? The one hosting the $600 plate gala at the Grand Hotel? I'm the primary benefactor. I've donated about $15 million to them over the past 4 years. The Grand Hotel? I'm a major investor in the ownership group that renovated it. Lily made a small choke sound. Your marketing firm, Lily? The one in the Summit building? I own that building. Your lease comes up for renewal next month. Of Us Design Studio? Also my property. Their lease expires in February. I smiled pleasantly at them. Diana, that exclusive neighborhood where you live? I developed half of those houses, including yours. Your mortgage is actually held by one of my subsidiary companies. The silence stretched out, broken only by the ambient noise of the mall, music from stores, conversations from other shoppers, the distant sound of children playing. So when you talk about tough love and realistic expectations and accepting limitations, I said finally, maybe we should start with your realistic expectation that you'll need to find new places to live and work, and your acceptance of the limitation that your financial futures depend entirely on someone you've spent years calling a disappointment. Diana's breathing had become shallow and rapid. Lily was crying quietly. Ava looked like she might be sick. But don't worry, I added gently. I'm not vindictive. I'm not cruel. I won't leave you homeless or jobless or struggling. I'm just going to let you experience what it feels like when someone you depend on decides you're not worth their time and investment. I started walking toward the management office, then paused and turned back one final time. Oh, and Diana, about that trust fund modification you wanted to discuss with the lawyers, I actually am one of the trustees. My father made sure I had control over my own inheritance just in case anyone ever tried to manipulate the terms. Have a good rest of your shopping trip. Try to remember that appearances can be deceiving, and sometimes the most successful people are the ones who don't need to prove anything to anyone. I walked away, leaving them sitting in the food court surrounded by luxury shopping bags in the mall I owned, processing the reality that the family disappointment they'd been trying to eliminate was actually the person who controlled their entire way of life. Behind me, I could hear Diana starting to hyperventilate, Lily sobbing, and Ava asking desperately, "What are we going to do? What are we going to do?" The management office was busy with weekend activity, maintenance requests, tenant concerns, security issues. Mark had the Zara lease modification ready for review along with several other documents that needed my attention. Sorry about the delay, I said, settling into the chair across from his desk. No problem at all, Mark replied. Family time is important. I picked up the first contract, scanning the terms and financial implications. Outside the office window, I could see the busy mall concourse, shoppers moving purposefully between stores, families enjoying their weekend together. Somewhere out there, Diana was probably trying to figure out how to salvage a situation that had gone from complete control to total disaster in the span of 10 minutes. Lily and Ava were likely realizing that their financial futures had just become much more uncertain. I signed the lease modification authorizing the electrical upgrades that would help Zara open their holiday display on schedule. Just another Saturday afternoon business decision in the ordinary, disappointing life of someone who had finally stopped caring what other people thought she was worth. My phone buzzed with a text message from Diana. "We need to talk. This doesn't change anything." I smiled and deleted the message without responding. "Actually, Diana, it changed everything."